Hi everybody, I'm KJ, my pronouns are they, them. I'm a counsellor and narrative therapist here in this place colonially known as Adelaide, Australia. Here are some of the ingredients in my particular autistic fruit salad. I didn't realise that I was autistic until I was over 50, and it hit me as a blinding flash of the bloody obvious. I really appreciate Nick Walker's writing, so I identify as neuroqueer, and as well as having a kinetic cognitive style, which is Nick's suggested alternative to the term ADHD. I'm a PDA with APD and dyspraxia, and I've spent a lot of time getting to know autistic burnout, both through my own lived experience and because I've chosen to learn as much about it as I can. And the most valuable learning, of course, has come from conversations that I've had with many, many autistic folks, especially over the last few years. So I'm a fellow traveller on this path, and I certainly don't claim to have all of the answers. But I have been interviewing autistic adults about their skills in dealing with autistic burnout to create a living document, a kind of archive of our collective knowledges about what helps, so that we can share those knowledges and skills with one another. So starting a couple of years ago in 2023, I have had the privilege of gathering and compiling stories from autistic folks talking about the ways that they're dealing with autistic burnout. And from those stories, a living document has emerged. And it's a document that I hope will keep on growing and evolving as we gather and share the wisdom of lived experience from an even broader range of autistic folks. The document is available to be shared freely, and many people have said that it's been helpful to them. Perhaps some of you here today are familiar with it already. I'm not going to talk about the document itself in detail today, but if you would like to know more about it, it's been published in the Open Access Journal, the International Journal of Narrative Therapy and Community Work, and the link is there for you on the bottom of the slide. And if you feel like you would like to contribute to that document yourself, I will be very happy to hear from you. Just briefly though, here are some of the themes that have emerged as being important to the autistic folks who have already generously contributed to this living document. So they're skills of knowing, naming and describing our experience, skills of identifying and asking for what we need, skills of sensory modulation, stimming and soothing, skills of connecting, and skills of resisting neuronormative expectations. Now, under each of those headings, the document contains many quotes from the autistic folks who participated, giving specific examples of how these skills have helped them through the tough times, and also, importantly, describing what or who helped them to develop and maintain these skills. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the underlying idea that connects all of these skills together and how we can support each other in community, because we know that autistic burnout isn't just an individual problem, it's a systemic problem. Being expected to push through all kinds of discomfort and meet neuronormative expectations that cause you harm or distress, and then being expected to go home and do your self-care and patch yourself up so that you can do it all again tomorrow, that is not sustainable, right? Well, not for any of the humans I've met anyway. And so if it's a systemic problem rather than just an individual problem, then it's going to be tough for us to make any significant and sustainable changes if we're only looking at individual solutions, right? So this is why I'm not talking so much about self-care these days, but more about care webs. I know that neurodivergent folks in general are the best at thinking outside the box. So I'm interested in seeing how we can deconstruct the box of this individualized idea of autistic burnout and collectively come up with ways to change the underlying conditions that are actually problematic, the barriers to adequate support, the expectations, the lack of acceptance and safety that makes adaptive morphing or camouflaging or masking necessary for our survival. Yes, advocating for changes to systemic oppression is absolutely necessary. We will work towards systemic change. We are working for systemic change. But systemic change is often far too slow. We don't want to wait for the systems to change. We want to create what we need in our community now, right? And if we don't do it, no one else will. The capitalist industrial complex does not care about you. It does not have your best interests at heart. It does not love you, and it will not miss you when you're gone. But when we weave webs of care with one another, we can help each other to dismantle some of those barriers to accessing supports. And we can affirm and encourage one another in resisting the pressures of neuronormativity. Autistic author and disability justice advocate Leah Lakshmi Piepzna Samarasina defines care webs as grassroots reciprocal networks of mutual support created by and for marginalised communities. These networks resist charity models and institutional control. Instead, they centre autonomy, collective access, and interdependence as vital tools for survival and justice. These are networks or collectives of people, often sick, disabled, queer, neurodivergent, and/or people of colour, who come together to provide mutual support and care and access to resources outside of conventional systems like the state or medical industrial complex. Care webs are both a practical and a visionary response to the gaps in care created by systemic oppression. They're a core part of disability justice work, offering blueprints for building sustainable, just, and abundant communities where care is a shared responsibility and everyone's contributions are valued. Care webs are built on principles of interdependence, reciprocity, and collective access. Reciprocity and collective access. Intentionally breaking away from models of charity or hierarchical caregiving. So care webs are not about one-way giving or just passive receipt of care. Instead, everyone involved in the web both gives and receives care according to their capacities and their needs, and recognising that not everyone can contribute in the same way and that this diversity is a strength of the system, not a flaw. Care webs are community-based and autonomous. They're created by and for the people within them. So that allows for autonomy and control over the type and manner of care received. They often emerge in response to the failures or inaccessibility of state or institutional care, and they're especially vital for those who face marginalisation or exclusion from mainstream systems. Care webs reject the idea that disabled people are merely passive recipients of care, or that care must be transactional. Instead, they operate on shared responsibility, collective decision-making, and a commitment to not burning out or exploiting anyone involved. Piepsna Samarasina emphasises that care webs are shaped by and must navigate the realities of ableism, racism, capitalism, and sexism, and all the other isms, which influence who feels worthy of care and who's expected to provide it. Care webs can take many different forms. So body doubling with friends, support swapping, information sharing. These kinds of practices are often informal, sometimes they're unnamed, and they're rooted in everyday acts of solidarity and survival. Many of us are already doing these things on the regular. We can nurture the autistic ecosystem by choosing to support autistic-run businesses and service providers, or we can mobilise practical support, doing things like organising visits for folks who are in hospital, or crowdsourcing funds for somebody's urgent needs, or even just sending a supportive message when we know that a community member is having a tough time. And this has me wondering about what then becomes possible when we choose to engage consciously in these practices of mutual support. Could care webs, mutual community-based networks of support, offer a powerful framework for addressing autistic burnout? I think so. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the ways that I think this can work. So collective peer-based support reduces isolation, and autistic burnout is often intensified and exacerbated by social isolation, lack of understanding from those around us, and inaccessible environments and systems of care. But care webs, by design, centre community and peer support. So they enable autistic people to connect with others who share lived experiences. And that means we can validate each other's struggles, and we can exchange practical advice or emotional support without judgment and without the pressure to mask our autistic traits. And this sense of belonging and acceptance is crucial for recovery. Conventional care models can be very rigid and hierarchical, or they could be based on charity, and they may feel really disempowering or inaccessible to autistic people. Care webs, in contrast, are reciprocal and flexible. Everyone contributes what they can and receives what they need without any stigma or expectation of conformity. And this is especially valuable for autistic folks whose needs may fluctuate or who struggle to articulate help requests, especially during burnout. And isn't that most of us? During burnout, executive functioning and daily tasks can become absolutely overwhelming. And so care webs can mobilise practical support with daily living. Things like meal preparation, help with getting to appointments, sensory-friendly check-ins, or even just sending a supportive message. And all of those things can be tailored to the individual's communication preferences and sensory needs. Because care webs are built by and for the community, they can be designed from the ground up to honour autistic ways of being and communicating. And space to unmask and rest. Oh, even just saying that, I can feel my shoulders drop. A core principle of care webs is creating environments where people can just be themselves without pressure to perform neurotypical behaviours. And for autistic people, this means being able to unmask, stim, choose when and how to engage socially without any coercion, and set boundaries without fear of judgment. And these are all key elements for recovering from burnout. And shared knowledge and advocacy. Care webs facilitate the sharing of resources, so understandings of coping strategies that might be helpful, advocacy skills specific to autistic experiences, And this collective wisdom that we share helps us to recognise burnout, helps us to understand our own needs and advocate for accommodations, empowering us to build lives that reduce the risk of future burnout. And care webs operate outside of mainstream conventional systems that are often inaccessible and often unhelpful, or in some cases actually harmful. So care webs can help autistic people find ways to bypass barriers that come from ableism, or lack of formal support, or misunderstanding from professionals. And this autonomy is vital for reclaiming the storytelling rights of autistic folks who have been failed over and over again by mainstream services. Care webs offer autistic people a sustainable, empowering, and community-rooted way to recover from burnout and to develop resistance to burnout, centering collective access, autonomy, and the wisdom of lived experience. So just to summarise, these are some of the challenges we face in burnout. When we're faced with social isolation, care webs can provide peer connection and validation, and shared experience, shared reality. When we're faced with the overwhelm that comes just from trying to carry out daily tasks, care webs can provide practical and non-judgmental mutual aid. If we're dealing with the need for unmasking and rest, care webs can be safe spaces to be authentic and to set boundaries. When we're having difficulty asking for help, care webs can provide flexible and low friction support structures. When we're faced with a lack of accessible care, care webs are community-driven, culturally resonant solutions. And when we're dealing with ableism in burnout, and honestly, when are we not dealing with ableism? Care webs can provide collective advocacy and resource sharing. Our connections within these care webs can vary to accommodate our fluctuating capacity. Sometimes we might be more actively weaving the structures that will support others, and sometimes we might rest and allow the care web to support us. The Autism CRC report, Uncovering the Hidden Histories of Late Diagnosed Autistic Adults, which was published in 2021, contained 4 recommendations, and the third of those 4 recommendations was this one. Our participants spoke extensively about the important and positive effects of telling their stories, and especially of telling them to other autistic people. We recommend, therefore, that efforts be made to foster networks of support between autistic people to enable them to tell their stories more frequently in more informal settings, as well as in the formal research environments. And this is another aspect of what care webs can provide. They can provide that informal setting for autistic folks to tell their stories in ways that make them stronger, with an audience of other autistic people to witness those stories. To quote the Spanish poet of the people, Antonio Machado, "Traveller, there is no path. The path is made by walking." And that's what we're trying to do with creating spaces that can become care webs. And there is no path, so we're forging our own path. And I'm going to hand over to Linda to speak about the ways that we have been doing that.
Thank you, KJ. Weaving Webs of Autistic Community Care. Proof of concept, neurokindred. Hello, I'm Linda Tuxford-Adams and my pronouns are she, they. I'm a late identified autistic ADHDer, exploring PDA and also dyspraxic. I'm a counsellor, educator and a peer mentor, and I am the founder and managing director of the online community for autistic adults called Neurokindred. Little flavors about me. I love to learn and I love community building and community weaving and all those sorts of things, and have done so since I was young. I love multimedia sculpture and World of Warcraft battle pets. And I am intimately acquainted with the Dante's Circle of Hell levels of autistic burnout, and am in recovery and rehabilitation and redesign of my life presently. So how do we do this thing? Unsubscribe from neurotypical expectations and internalized ableism. Would that we could all just cast off the shackles, disappear into the woods, and find ourselves a little cave or mushroom hut to dwell in blissful peace and communion with nature, with antihistamines for MCAS flares, of course. But life does not allow that. We must eat, shelter, and do all the adulting that kids and jobs require. And even if we do manage to somehow lower demands, adjust our schedules, don our noise-cancelling headphones, and battle the reasonable adjustment gauntlet to get supports in place, what then? How do we resist the constant pressure to perform, to produce, to contort, to boom then bust, as Dr. Megan Ann Neff put it? How do we resist and preserve ourselves whilst in recovery, whilst rehabilitating, and whilst recreating a new life that aligns with our autistic ways of being? In short, how do we thrive autistically? The answer is as old as time and just as powerful. Community. Connections with Neurogen. Rich, dense webs of community care, complex and prolific like the mycelium networks beneath mushrooms. Its tendrils ever weaving in organic, emergent, self-sustaining support systems that help us resist the pull back into the vortex of masking, performing, and grinding. Through shared experiences and collective knowledge, we begin to rebuild, rejuvenate, replenish, reinvent. We find refuge, strength, and renewal in the solidarity of others who truly understand the weight that we carry. And together, we forge paths to recovery that honour who we truly are, not what the world expects us to be. Let me tell you a story. Papa Smurf was tired, beyond tired. They had travelled the wilderness alone for many years, first battling the murky bogs of the education system, then braving the wild west of the workplace and climbing the never-ending demand mountain of parenting and relationships. They had white-knuckled through relationships with vampires, battled monsters of depression, occupational burnout, bullying, collapse after collapse, dragging themselves up every time. But it had all finally hit a wall. Papa Smurf was royally fucked. Their beautiful brain, their Swiss Army knife of survival, their secret weapon, well, out of everything really, was now a spurting, misfiring contraption of inefficiency and dysfunction, banging away like an old refrigerator about to die. And Papa Smurf had always loved to intellectualize. It was how they bore things, survived things. It was easier that way. When emotions felt too big, too overwhelming, too chaotic, the solution was simple. Think, understand it, deconstruct it, find the pattern, label it, sort it. But this time it wasn't working. Papa Smurf was humbled, a mortal gaping wound of vulnerability bleeding into the forest floor. "Try these magic tablets," the doctor said, and handed them a lengthy scroll of diagnoses that didn't quite make sense. "Yoga is the answer," a patchouli-laced guru sang. "Fill in this DBT table for every thought," the cheerful psych prescribed. Papa Smurfs wore themselves out even more, trying to stabilize, but nothing helped. Nothing worked. Finally, they stumbled, weighed down by a backpack full of medications, hands cramping from frantically scribbling down every racing thought, and a metre-long scroll of disorders that just kept growing longer by the minute. And then, a burnt-out husk of their former self, they collapsed in defeat by the river of sorrows. The current was strong, and for a moment, all they could think was how much easier it would be to just float away, to let the water carry them far from the grind, away from the weight of expectations, away from trying to fit themselves into a world that was never built for them. But then, as Papa Smurf sat there, lost in their own spiralling thoughts, something shifted. From the edge of the forest, a quiet figure stepped out. It was another Smurf! Papa Smurf had heard rumours, but had never seen one before. They blinked, stunned. The little Smurf reached out a hand, and for the first time, Papa Smurf felt like they weren't alone. They felt a warmth, a small flicker. It was weak, but it was there. Hope. And there, by the river, Papa Smurf realised something. Maybe it wasn't about fixing what was broken. Maybe it wasn't about fixing at all. What if the way forward was to unlearn everything they'd been taught about what it means to survive in the neurotypical world? What if there could be a place where all Smurfs could gather? A place to learn from each other about how not to just survive, but to thrive in this world. A place of healing. A place where doing things in line with Smurfy ways of being wasn't just allowed, but encouraged, nurtured, leaned into. Where orthogonal odysseys in conversation were a shared delight, where immersing oneself in the deep, passionate interests of another Smurf was a free and regular event, where Smurfy ways of regulating were always available, and someone was always there to co-regulate with. A place where connection and understanding ran deeper than just words. They were woven into the very fabric of the community. And as the world building began to take shape in Papa Smurf's mind, magic mushroom s'mores emerged from the glimmer in his eyes and drifted on the wind to the forest floor. Thank you for your indulgence. NeuroKindred is an autistic-led social enterprise nonprofit that was born out of the tears, really, of isolation, lack of services, lack of support, and institutional-based trauma. It started with a little patch of mushroom huts called peer support, where much triaging of hurt autistics occurred, and some connection too through shared woes and wisdom. This wasn't an Autism 101 model. This was a pocket of peace model, where peer support and relational containment were prioritised. Stories were told in safe enough spaces, beautiful, poignant, healing stories from autistic elders, women and non-binary plus folks, spoonies, those with complex trauma, and multicultural autistics. But something was missing. A shift was needed. How do we thrive as autistics in this world? Then came the Thriving Autistically online event, where autistic wellbeing was made the focus and connection to Neurokin was at the heart of it. Over 150 autistics came together, bringing their special interests, ways of regulating, and secret treasures like a beautiful, colourful bazaar of autistic delights. This was it, the missing element. Out of this event, we formed new groups focused on play and deep passions, led by autistics who loved what they were doing. The grassroots call went out, whispered through the Facebook groups, and soon they came from where they'd been hiding to share in the growing community. With each new connection, each new emergent iteration, we could see it more clearly. This was the way, a beautiful, reciprocal, emergent community way of being, a living, organic ecosystem. Community therapy and care webs are rich conceptualizations and practices articulated beautifully in narrative therapy, which KJ has shared with me. As I've read about these ways that centre and privilege local knowledge and lived experience, I look to each of the 28 sessions a month we now run with such a kaleidoscope of autistic expression in our members, and I see those ideas alive and moving in real time. So why does NeuroKindred work? Because it is emergent, born directly from community need for places to thrive. It is an evolving and responsive ecosystem of support. It is highly relational and facilitates safe enough connection. It prioritizes frictionless attendance, multiple exits, clear guidelines, and full transparency. It offers a predictable but flexible structure. Each group, each mushroom hut is a co-creation of facilitators and those attending. No two are the same. The village has attracted light bearers, people who share the vision of a sustainable, accessible web of community care for autistic adults. NeuroKindred creates space for everyone's unique way of being so long as it respects others' ways of being. It's not perfect, but we are deeply committed to cultivating safe enough and to supporting our facilitators with the skill and capacity to hold space. Our peer mentors have emerged organically from within the community, drawing on the rich lived experience to lead groups alongside their co-facilitators. We are autistics supporting autistics, building ways of working that are flexible and sustainable, designed to flow with fluctuating capacity. It is both rich layered experience and simple principles. By creating conditions that support and validate our autistic ways of being, we foster organic, evolving weaving of autistic community care webs. But how do we sustain these pockets of peace, reservoirs of rehabilitation, webs of autistic community care? And how do we connect them to other communities, communes, and travelling circuses on a national and international scale? Through collaboration, through lifting each other up, through beautiful initiatives like this amazing conference. Thank you.
And there are just some references there in case you would like to follow up with reading any of the things that we've referred to for yourselves. Thank you all so much.